I want to ask you a very simple question. Have you ever looked back at your spending at the end of the month and thought, "That's strange. I didn't buy anything big. So why does my money feel gone already?" You didn't buy luxury items. You didn't splurge recklessly. There was no obvious blow-up expense, and yet your balance still feels thinner. What's interesting is this. A lot of people I've observed over the years feel exactly the same way, and most of them assume the problem is rising prices, not earning enough, or not being disciplined enough. But after years of watching real financial behavior, I realized something very different. Money doesn't disappear because you buy too much. It disappears because there's no clear stopping point in your mind. Idea 1. Grocery money doesn't leak because you love buying. It leaks because you walk in without knowing when to stop. I've noticed that most people walk into a store with a very familiar mindset. I'll just buy what I need. It shouldn't cost that much. That sounds reasonable. But psychologically, it's one of the most dangerous ways to spend. When you don't decide on a limit ahead of time, your brain quietly assumes that everything in front of you is acceptable. Each item feels small. Each item has a reasonable explanation, and each one is easy to justify. I'll need this anyway. This will last a while. Just one more thing for convenience. What most people don't realize is that the brain doesn't add up spending item by item. It only reacts strongly when it sees the final total. And by then, you can't undo the decisions you've already made. I've watched the same person, same store, same needs, same income. The only difference was this. This time, they set a number in their head before walking in. The result was completely different. They no longer wandered around thinking, everything is fair game. They started asking a different question. If I take this, what do I have to leave behind? And that moment matters, because now you're no longer collecting, you're choosing within a boundary. Choice forces prioritization. Prioritization forces you to separate real needs, old habits, and things you buy just because they're convenient. One consistent pattern I've noticed is this. People who manage their money well aren't better at suffering. They simply know where their stopping point is. They don't need a perfect number. They don't need to track every dollar. They just need a boundary clear enough for the brain to understand. Beyond this point, things start going wrong. Saving money doesn't start with cutting back. It starts with defining the end. And unfortunately, most people never do that. So money quietly leaks out every month without anyone ever noticing the exact moment it started. Idea 2. Shopping lists don't fail because you lack discipline. They fail because you turn them into a perfection test. I've noticed a very familiar contradiction. People often tell me, I always shop with a list, so why am I still spending so much? Most of the time, it's not because they're doing it wrong. It's because they expect the wrong thing from the list. Many people treat a shopping list like a rule book. If it's written down, it must be bought. If something is missing, it feels uncomfortable. If the price is higher than expected, frustration kicks in. And that frustration is the real problem. When you walk into a store with a perfect list, your brain stays tense. All it takes is one item, out of stock, more expensive than expected, or not the usual brand, and you lose your rhythm. Once that rhythm breaks, the brain shifts from logical mode to relief-seeking mode. Now decisions are no longer based on need, but on feelings. I'll just grab something else and be done. I've already put in the effort. I deserve to make this easier. What most people don't notice is this. Emotional spending doesn't need a big trigger. A small irritation is enough. I've seen that people who manage money well don't use lists as strict rules. They use them as a directional frame. Their lists don't say, I must buy this exact item. They say, I need this type of food. For example, not this exact cut of meat, but a protein source for 3 meals. Not this exact vegetable, but vegetables for the week. That's the difference. When substitution is allowed, the brain stays in thinking mode instead of frustration mode. And when the brain keeps thinking, emotions don't get to drive the wallet. What I've learned is very clear. Saving money doesn't come from tighter self-control. It comes from designing situations where you don't have to fight yourself. A flexible list does exactly that. It reminds you what you need without forcing you to battle reality. And ironically, that flexibility is what keeps the budget far more solid. Idea 3. You don't buy expensive groceries. You buy immediate relief. I've realized that many of the most expensive grocery decisions aren't about eating better. They're about feeling less tired. It sounds small, but it has a powerful impact on spending behavior. When someone shops while hungry or after a long, draining day, the brain loses its ability to compare and evaluate. It switches into a different mode, the fast relief mode. At that point, convenience items no longer feel like extra options. They feel like solutions. This is quicker. This saves me cooking. I don't have the energy to think. What most people don't realize is that when mental energy is low, the brain values convenience more than price. And because each convenience item is only slightly more expensive, it doesn't feel dangerous. The problem is that slightly more expensive repeats every single week. I've observed people with very stable food budgets, and they weren't better at math. They did one simple thing. They avoided making decisions while exhausted. They ate something small before shopping. They chose a time when their mind was clearer. Or they avoided shopping under time pressure. The result? Same store, same products, completely different outcome for their wallet. What's interesting is this. When you're not tired, convenience items look like what they really are. Not lifesavers, but overpriced shortcuts. Many people think they spend money because they're lazy. In reality, they spend because they're overloaded. And when that overload is reduced, you don't need to try harder to save. Spending naturally drops. Money doesn't leak because you lack discipline. It leaks because you're buying comfort in moments of exhaustion. Idea 4. A lot of money is lost not when you buy, but when you don't use what you bought. There's something most people completely overlook when talking about saving money. We focus on the moment we pay. But we rarely look at the moment food gets thrown away, and that's where a surprising amount of money disappears, quietly, without pain. Inside the store, people usually shop with a hopeful version of the future in mind. This week, I'll cook more. I'll eat healthier. I'll get home earlier. I'll have time to prepare. What's interesting is that this future feels very convincing, but it's not the real schedule. When life returns to its normal rhythm, the food bought for the better version of yourself just sits in the fridge. At first, nothing feels wrong. The money is already spent. There's no immediate sense of loss. Until one day, you open the fridge and realize it's expired. At that point, the money is lost twice. Once when you bought it, and again when you realize you never used it. Most people don't notice that food waste doesn't create strong guilt, so it repeats easily. It's not like buying a luxury item. It's not like paying a big bill. It happens quietly, which makes it very hard to control. I've noticed that people who manage food spending well don't necessarily buy cheaper items. They buy items they are certain they will eat. They don't shop based on in-store inspiration. They shop based on their real daily rhythm. Fewer items, but everything gets used. Less excitement at purchase, but a lighter mind when cleaning out the fridge. After years of watching this, I've learned eating what you buy saves far more money than buying things at the right price. An item that gets used is always more valuable than a cheap item that gets thrown away. Saving money isn't about optimizing every decision. It's about reducing decisions that lead to waste. Idea 5. Many people think they buy because it's cheaper, but they're really buying peace of mind. I've noticed something very subtle in how people choose products. Many decisions in the store don't come from the question, is this worth the money? They come from a deeper one. Does this make me feel safe? A very ordinary example. You're choosing between two options, a smaller package and a larger one. The smaller one looks cheaper. Less money up front, less risk. The brain whispers, buy less first, just to be safe. What if I don't use it? No need to commit. What most people don't realize is that this sense of safety has very little to do with actual value. It's about fear of waste, fear of making the wrong decision, and fear of commitment. Financially, though, these safe choices often end up costing more over time because small packages are designed to feel light on your wallet at purchase, but heavy when repeated again and again. I've seen people with stable spending who aren't better at math. They simply see through the illusion of short-term comfort. They don't ask, does this make me feel safe right now? They ask, if I buy this every week, every month, every year, what happens? That single question rearranges many choices automatically. What's interesting is that once you get used to thinking this way, you hesitate less. Less hesitation leads to fewer impulse decisions, and fewer impulse decisions always mean less money quietly leaking away. Saving money isn't about forcing yourself to buy the cheapest option. It's about stopping short-term comfort from driving long-term decisions. Idea 6. Your grocery bill doesn't blow up because you eat too many different things. It blows up because you're making too many decisions. I've noticed something really interesting in people who always say, grocery shopping is exhausting, and somehow it always costs more than I expect. The problem usually isn't the food itself. It's the number of decisions they have to make. Every different meal is a decision. Every new recipe is a decision. Every unfamiliar ingredient is a decision. And the brain is not built to handle a long chain of decisions without getting tired. When you have to choose too much, your brain starts looking for the fastest way to end the process. That's when the just get it done choices show up. Let's grab one more thing so it feels complete. I'll just take this and stop thinking. This is already prepared, so it's easier. What most people don't realize is this. Your spending spikes the most, not when you buy something expensive, but when you're mentally worn out from thinking too much. I've observed that people who control their food spending really well often have one surprisingly simple pattern. Their menus aren't very varied, not because their diet is sad or restrictive, but because it's familiar. They rotate a few core meals. They repeat a few go-to dishes. They reuse the same ingredients across multiple days. That creates a powerful psychological effect. When meals are familiar, you don't have to think as much. And when you don't have to think as much, you don't need to buy extra items to make up for it. Fewer decisions usually means fewer mistakes. And fewer mistakes is always cheaper than trying to fix things later. What I've realized is this. Simplifying your meals doesn't make life smaller. It makes your wallet less stressed. Not because you're eating less, but because you stop paying for mental fatigue. Idea 7. Shopping more often doesn't make you more flexible. It makes you more likely to mess up. There's a very common belief people rarely question. If I shop more often, I'll buy less each time and it'll be easier to control my spending. It sounds logical, but when you look at real behavior, the opposite often happens. Every time you walk into a store, you're not just buying groceries, you're exposing yourself to temptation. You don't need to buy a lot. You just need to add a little, something you forgot to write down, something that's on sale, something that looks familiar and might be useful. And because each trip is only a little extra, your brain doesn't treat it like a problem. But what most people don't notice is this. Those little extras don't stand alone. They repeat, week after week, and when you add them up, they become a real number. It's just that no one remembers exactly where it started. I've noticed that people with stable spending aren't stronger-willed. They simply reduce how often they have to face choices. Fewer shopping trips means fewer moments you have to say no. And when you don't have to keep saying no, you get less tired. When you're less tired, you're less likely to spend emotionally. Instead of relying on daily discipline, they rely on a plan they made earlier. They shop less often, but they shop more prepared. And what's interesting is this. When the number of trips goes down, you don't feel deprived. You just feel mentally lighter, and your wallet feels lighter in a good way too. What I've realized is this. Real savings doesn't come from constantly controlling yourself. It comes from reducing how often you have to be tested. Idea 8. When grocery money is mixed with everything else, your boundaries disappear fast. I've noticed something quiet but incredibly powerful in how people spend. A lot of people keep grocery money in the same bucket as everything else. Food, coffee, small treats, random convenience purchases. It all runs through one stream of money. When money isn't separated, your brain has a hard time sensing the boundary. An extra item in the cart is no longer compared to your grocery budget. It's compared to the total money you have left that month. And compared that way, everything looks small. It's just a little extra. It's nothing compared to the whole month. What most people don't realize is this. Going over budget rarely happens in one big decision. It happens through dozens of tiny decisions you barely notice. When grocery money doesn't have its own space, small add-ons slide by without leaving a clear trail. So at the end of the month, you only know you're short, but you don't know where it went. I've observed that people who manage food spending well share one common trait. They treat grocery money like its own separate zone, not to tighten everything up, but to make it visible. When money has a clear shape, your brain adjusts behavior in real time. No forcing, no constant self-talk, just clarity. And interestingly, that clarity often cuts spending more than trying to be more disciplined in your head. What I've learned is this: good money organization solves problems before discipline even gets tested. And a lot of people are trying to be disciplined when the real issue is a blurry boundary. Idea 9. The pressure to do it perfectly often makes you spend more. I've noticed something that feels backwards at first. The people who are the most determined to save on groceries are often the ones who end up overspending later, not because they don't understand money, but because they put themselves in a mentally tense place. They want to buy correctly. They want the best price. They don't want to make mistakes. And when the expectation becomes, I have to do this right, every grocery trip turns into a test. One meal doesn't go as planned. One item doesn't get used in time. One slip-up. And suddenly that feeling of failure shows up. What most people don't realize is this: when failure shows up, the brain quickly shifts into a whatever mindset. Forget it. I already messed up. This week doesn't count anymore. And that exact moment opens the door to a whole chain of worse decisions. I've seen people who stay stable long-term and they aren't perfect. They allow imperfect. They don't force the cheapest option every time. They don't try to optimize every single trip. They focus on one thing. Did the food actually get used? If something gets wasted, they don't beat themselves up, but they remember it. And next time, they don't buy it again. That's it. No pressure. No self-judgment, just adjustment. And what's interesting is this approach saves far more money than trying to do it perfectly from the start. What I've learned is money is kept best not through perfection, but through steady progress. Idea 10. Money stays with you not because you have clever hacks, but because you know where you're wasting it. After years of watching spending behavior, I've realized a very direct truth. Most grocery money isn't lost because you bought expensive items. It's lost because you bought things and didn't use them. That's hard to notice because food waste doesn't hurt immediately. No alerts, no bill, no number flashing in your face. Just one day you clean out the fridge and toss a few expired items. The brain is really good at softening that feeling. It's fine. I'll pay attention next time. It wasn't that much money. But what most people don't realize is this: those "it's fine" losses repeat every week, every month, every year, and when you add them up, they're bigger than a few occasional expensive mistakes. I've noticed people who handle food spending well don't obsess over every dollar they spend. They pay attention to what they throw away. They remember clearly what they keep buying but rarely use, what they buy because they feel inspired, what they always leave unfinished. And they quietly remove those items from future shopping trips. No massive plan, no intense discipline, just awareness. And what's interesting is this: when waste goes down, you naturally feel less pressure to save aggressively. More money stays with you without sacrificing comfort. What I've realized is real sustainable saving isn't about chasing deals, and it isn't about punishing yourself. It's about respecting the money you already spent by using what you buy. And when you do that, money starts staying with you in a very natural way. If you heard yourself in any of these points, pick just one idea from this video and try it this week. You don't have to do everything, just start. And if this kind of breakdown helps you understand money more clearly, make sure to like the video and subscribe, because I'll keep sharing real-world money psychology and how people who manage money well actually think and behave. Thanks for watching.